Millionaire CEO sees three boys washing his windows, then realizes they all look like him. He built an empire floor by floor, but it was three small faces on a scaffold that cracked it all open. It's strange, isn't it? The way one moment, barely a glance, can turn your entire world upside down. Elijah Mercer had never walked home before. Not really. Not without a car waiting or a phone call guiding every step. But that evening, something pulled him out of routine. He slipped his hands into his coat pockets and let the cold air bite his cheeks. The city moved around him loud and fast, but inside him, something had slowed. If stories like this one stir something in you, a moment of surprise, a spark of what matters, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts as the story unfolds. Now back to Elijah. His office tower stood tall behind him, glowing with the ambition that had shaped his life. But as he turned the corner, something shifted. On the second floor, just above the polished marble ledge, three small figures worked together, balancing on a shaky scaffold. One scrubbed a pane, another held a dripping rag, and the third steadied a bucket that looked far too heavy for his small frame. Elijah almost kept walking. Almost. But then one of the boys turned his head. The light caught his face, and Elijah froze. Hazel eyes, crooked smile, that same restless twitch in the hands. He wasn't looking at strangers. He was looking at himself, split into three small bodies, working past dark in thin jackets that didn't match the cold. And just like that, his life, once so perfectly structured, began to quietly unravel. He told himself it was a coincidence, a weird one, sure, but these things happened right. Kids sometimes resembled strangers. Faces played tricks in the dark. There had to be another explanation. But all night, Elijah couldn't shake it. Every time he closed his eyes, those three little faces stared back. Same eyes, same chin. The way one of them wrinkled his nose when he smiled, that was exactly how Elijah looked in the only childhood photo he still had. By morning, the thoughts had hardened into something heavier. Not curiosity, not even fear. A need. He had to know. He sat in his office with the city skyline behind him, the room so quiet you could hear the soft buzz of the thermostat. Usually his morning was a blur of back-to-back calls, quick decisions, and espresso shots. But today the coffee sat untouched, and the call notifications were left unanswered. He couldn't focus, not until he had answers. He opened his contacts and found the number. Ray Adler, private investigator, discreet, efficient, no questions unless necessary. Elijah typed the message slowly, then deleted it. Typed again, shorter this time. Need help finding three boys, about 6. Triplets. Seen outside my building last night. Possibly homeless. No parents visible. He hesitated, then hit send. The reply came just minutes later. Understood. Any photos? Elijah leaned back in his chair, hand on his face. No, he muttered. Just me. They look like me. Ray didn't ask questions. Give me 6 hours. Elijah spent those 6 hours pacing his office, sitting at his desk, getting up again, staring out at the glass skyline with a knot tightening in his chest. When his assistant came in to ask about a budget review, he waved her off. Around noon, his phone buzzed. Ray had delivered. He opened the file on his laptop. One photo low quality, probably from a security camera. 3 small boys on the sidewalk outside the building. One looked up at the lens. Elijah's breath caught. Ray's message came next. Names Jaden Micah and Theo Daniels. Age 6. No father listed on record. Mother Maya Daniels. Elijah stared at the screen. That name didn't belong to the present. It belonged to another lifetime. His fingers froze over the keyboard. Maya. He hadn't heard her name in almost 7 years. She'd been the only woman who ever really saw him. Back when he was still just the guy building pitch decks in coffee shops, sleeping 4 hours a night, trying to get VCs to believe in a product that didn't exist yet. Maya had been soft-spoken but sharp, an artist with eyes that didn't flinch and a steadiness that scared him because it made him want to stay. They were together for 2 years, quiet dinners, long walks, gentle Sundays that didn't feel like wasted time. She had never demanded more than he could give, but maybe that was the problem. Because when the first real funding came through, when the world started calling his name, he didn't know how to take her with him. One month, he was at her apartment every other night. The next, he was on planes and boardrooms, eating fast food at midnight and telling himself it was temporary. Then she was gone. No fight, no note, just disappeared. He called at first. Then he called again. Then he stopped. Now she was back, in a file, with 3 6-year-old boys who looked just like him. Elijah pressed his hands against his face and sat there, elbows on the desk forehead, pressed to the edge of his laptop. For the first time in years, he didn't know what move came next. He requested every detail Ray could find. Anything. School records, doctor visits, addresses, a timeline, a story. An hour later, another email arrived. Maya Daniels deceased. 6 months ago. Leukemia. No surviving family. Emergency contact listed Margaret Harper, local volunteer at Harmony Street Shelter. 6 months. While Elijah had been closing deals and signing acquisition contracts, Maya had been dying. And now, she was gone. No will. No goodbye. Just those 3 boys. Jaden, Micah, Theo, his sons. Elijah didn't read the rest of the file. He shut the laptop, stood up too fast, and knocked over his chair. He didn't pick it up, didn't tell anyone where he was going. He grabbed his keys and left. The drive across the city felt longer than it should have, not because of traffic, but because his brain couldn't stay still. He saw Maya's smile, the way she used to fold napkins into odd little triangles, the tiny scar on her chin from falling off her bike as a kid. He remembered how she once said she didn't believe in forever, only in showing up again tomorrow. He hadn't. Now it was too late. Harmony Street Shelter sat sandwiched between a laundromat and an old brick building with graffiti on the side. It looked nothing like the glass towers Elijah was used to walking through. It smelled like laundry detergent coffee and something faintly metallic. Inside, a woman sat at the front desk, knitting something soft and pale blue. She looked up when the door creaked open. "You must be Mr. Mercer," she said. Elijah blinked. Yes. How did you... I'm Margaret. Maya told me about you." His throat tightened. She did. Margaret's face softened. "Only a little. She left something for you. Didn't know if you'd ever come." She reached behind the counter and brought out a small sealed envelope. It was worn at the edges. Elijah's name was written in looping, familiar handwriting. He stared at it. "I haven't read it," he whispered. "You don't have to." "Not yet," she said kindly. "Take your time. The boys aren't here at the moment. School, but they'll be back this afternoon." Elijah looked around. The chipped paint, the plastic chairs, the toy bin in the corner with mismatched puzzle pieces. Everything in him wanted to get up and leave. But something else, something deeper, told him to stay. "Can I wait here?" he asked. "Of course." He sat down in the far corner, folding his hands in his lap like he was in a courtroom. The letter stayed in his coat pocket, warm from his body, heavy like a stone. For nearly an hour, he didn't move. He didn't check his phone. He didn't read emails. He didn't open the envelope. He just waited. Because for once in his life, he didn't want to miss what came next. And that was when the door opened. The door opened with the kind of squeak you don't hear in skyscrapers. Soft footsteps padded in 3 sets, shuffling and uneven, followed by the tired clatter of small backpacks dropped near the entrance. Elijah didn't look up at first. He couldn't, but his heart had already noticed. They were laughing, arguing about something trivial like which one had won a race or who got to sit closest to the heater. Their voices were high-pitched and light, bouncing around the small shelter lobby, like music he hadn't realized he missed. Then one of them said, "You cheated, Jaden did not. I touched the door first. You pushed me. That's racing." Another voice cut in, calm and quiet. "You both smell like lunch meat." It was that strange natural harmony only siblings have, not just triplets bonded boys who had no one else but each other. Elijah's hands tightened into fists on his knees. He breathed in through his nose, slow and steady like he used to before investor pitches. Margaret's voice came from behind the desk. "Boys, come here a moment." The laughter stopped. Footsteps approached. He heard them turn the corner, and then they saw him. Silence. 3 boys standing in a line without speaking. Not frozen, not scared, just still, as if they sensed something had shifted in the room but hadn't yet named it. Elijah stood slowly. Margaret said gently, "This is Mr. Mercer. He's a friend of your mom's." The boys looked at her, then back at him. The tallest Jaden Elijah guessed tilted his head. "The guy with the sandwich," he said quietly. Elijah nodded. "Yeah, that was me." They didn't smile. They didn't run to him. But they didn't step back either. They studied him the way he studied spreadsheets, looking for hidden meanings and details that didn't quite line up. Micah, the one with messy curls and a more open face, asked, "Are you here to yell at us for working on your building?" "No," Elijah said, startled. "No, I didn't even... I didn't know." Theo didn't speak. He was the smallest and stood half behind the others, peeking out from Jaden's side. His hands were wrapped around the straps of his backpack, knuckles white. Elijah cleared his throat. "I knew your mom. A long time ago. She said your name before Micah said, when she was really sick." Jaden's eyes narrowed slightly, not out of aggression, more like suspicion earned from living without easy answers. "You were important to her, I think I was," Elijah answered honestly. "But I didn't know about you. I didn't know she was sick. I didn't know anything until a day ago." The boys looked at each other. That strange wordless conversation passed between them again. "Can we sit?" Elijah asked. Margaret stepped in again. "Why don't you take the rec room? There's cocoa already made." They moved slowly, not quite trusting, but curious enough to follow. Elijah walked behind them, watching how they nudged each other, how they avoided eye contact with him, but glanced back just enough to make sure he was real. The rec room was small, warm, a little cluttered. A couch that sagged in the middle. 2 mismatched chairs. A small shelf of board games, missing half their pieces. The cocoa sat in 3 paper cups on a tray. Margaret must have known they'd be back soon. Elijah sat in the chair nearest the door. The boys sat together on the couch. Theo curled close to the middle. Micah took the cup without hesitation, Jaden with caution. Theo not at all. Do you mind if I read something?" Elijah asked. They looked at him. He pulled the envelope from his coat pocket and held it gently in his hands like it might break. "It's from your mom. She left it for me. No one said no." His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. The paper inside was creased and soft at the edges. Maya's handwriting was instantly familiar, neat but slightly slanted, the lowercase, E's always a little higher than they should be. He swallowed and began to read Elijah. "If you're reading this, it means the boys found you, or maybe you found them. I always thought you would eventually. I never told you about them because I was afraid. Not of you, but of what your world might do to them. You were always reaching so high, and I didn't want to be the reason you stopped. But I did raise them with stories about you, about how clever you were, how fast your brain worked, how you once solved a parking garage riddle in under 5 minutes. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell everything. They are so much like you. It's strange and beautiful and sometimes a little hard. Theo's quiet like you when you're thinking. Micah asks 100 questions a minute, and Jaden is already trying to run things like he's the mayor of the shelter. I didn't know how long I had. I tried to prepare, but I couldn't do everything. So now I'm asking you, even though I have no right to please, don't walk away. Not from them. Not this time." Maya. The room was quiet. Elijah didn't realize he had been crying until he felt the warmth on his face. He didn't wipe it away. Micah's voice broke the silence. "You were the guy with the parking garage thing." Elijah let out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, that's true." Theo reached for his cocoa finally. Jaden asked, "You gonna leave?" "No," Elijah said firmly. "I'm not." The answer seemed to hang there, testing the air, and slowly it seemed to settle. Theo climbed up beside him, not in a dramatic way, just eased onto the armrest shoulder against Elijah's. Micah followed, this time sitting on the floor by his feet, stirring his drink. Jaden stayed on the couch, watching, thinking. "I think there's a lot I need to explain," Elijah said quietly, "and I want to do it right, if you'll let me." Jaden shrugged. "Okay, but no more sandwiches with mustard. Theo hates mustard." Elijah nodded. "Got it. No mustard." And for the first time in a long, long time, he smiled. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was a beginning, and he wasn't going to miss another one. 3 days had passed since that quiet afternoon in the shelter rec room, but Elijah could still hear the way Jaden said, "You gonna leave?" He hadn't known how much weight that question carried until he heard it. Now he found himself back again. Same corner chair, same chipped paint on the wall behind him, waiting like he'd done the first day, but this time with intention. He hadn't brought gifts or flashy promises, just himself. The boys had agreed to let him visit after school, and Margaret had given a soft nod of encouragement as he returned. "Just be there," she'd said. "Don't try to fix everything. They've seen people try. What they need is someone who stays." So he stayed. He was there when they came through the shelter door that afternoon, their jackets half-zipped, one of them already talking a mile a minute about a playground argument, the others chiming in with corrections. "And I didn't say he was a cheater, I said he runs like a chicken. That's not better, Micah." "Is too." Jaden spotted Elijah first. He didn't flinch this time. He just gave a small, cautious nod, the kind kids give when they're still deciding how much they trust you. Elijah stood smiling slightly. "Hey." Theo reached for his brother's hand, but didn't hide behind him. "Progress." "Want to hang out in the back again?" Elijah asked. Jaden looked to the others. "Yeah, okay." They went to the rec room together. This time, Elijah brought something with him. Not flashy, not expensive, just a deck of worn Uno cards and a rubber band. "I don't know all the rules," he admitted. Micah lit up. "We do. Jaden changes them anyway." "I do not." Theo giggled, which Elijah noticed was rare. They sat on the floor together, cross-legged knees, bumping cards scattered between them. Elijah listened more than he spoke. He learned that Micah liked science and had once made a vinegar volcano explode on a librarian's desk, that Jaden could name all the U.S. presidents in order but only backward, and that soft-spoken Theo collected bottle caps and sorted them by color in a shoebox under his bed. The game ended with someone accusing someone else of cheating and a pile of wild cards thrown into the air like confetti. But no one stormed off. No one cried. They just laughed and started making up new rules on the spot. When the cards were eventually cleaned up, Elijah sat back against the couch. The boys drifted into their own conversations, half talking to each other, half playing with a Lego bin that seemed to produce endless tiny swords and helmeted warriors. And that's when Elijah finally asked, "Can I tell you more about your mom?" The room quieted. Micah nodded quickly. Theo sat still, holding a Lego dragon. Jaden didn't say yes or no. He just looked at Elijah and waited. "She was funny," Elijah said. "Not loud funny, clever funny. She used to paint things that didn't make sense at first, but then you'd stare at them long enough and you'd feel something. Like you just remembered something you didn't know you forgot." Theo tilted his head. "Like a dream." "Exactly like that," Elijah smiled. "She had a favorite coffee shop," he continued. "She hated bitter coffee, but ordered it anyway, then drowned it in sugar. Said it reminded her that nothing had to stay the way it started. She used to say that," Jaden said quietly, "to us." Micah leaned in. "Did you love her?" Elijah's chest tightened. He didn't dodge. "Yes, I did." "Then why didn't you come back?" It was Jaden again. There it was. Elijah let out a long breath, steady but low. "I didn't know," he said honestly. "She left, and I didn't know why. I looked for a little while. Then life got loud. I let the noise win. And I've regretted that ever since I saw your faces." "Do you think she wanted us to find you?" Theo asked, voice so soft it barely reached. Elijah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the letter. He unfolded it, smoothing the page, and handed it to Theo. "She hoped I'd find you," he said, "and that I wouldn't leave again." Theo didn't read it, just held it carefully like it was made of glass. Micah leaned against Elijah's side without thinking. "Are you going to be our dad now?" The question sat in the air. Elijah didn't rush to answer. "I don't want to be someone who just shows up once and disappears. I want to be someone who learns how to be there for you even when I get it wrong. If that's something you want too, then yes. I'd like to be your dad." Jaden's eyes flicked up. "Even when we're annoying," Elijah laughed. "Especially then." Theo crawled into his lap. No words, just quiet closeness. And for the first time in his life, Elijah Mercer didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's story. He felt like he belonged. They spent the rest of the afternoon building a Lego fortress together. Micah insisted it needed a rocket launcher. Theo added a secret room for cats. Jaden designed a watchtower and refused to let anyone touch it. When Margaret peeked in later, she found the four of them huddled over the floor, laughing elbows, touching Elijah with a tiny red brick stuck to his sleeve. She smiled and left them alone. Some things don't need commentary. That night, Elijah didn't go home to his penthouse. He booked a cheap room near the shelter. Ate leftover pizza from a corner shop. Opened his laptop but didn't check a single email. Instead, he typed in a search bar, how to file for emergency guardianship. Because the next step wasn't just showing up, it was staying, and this time he was ready. Elijah stood outside the shelter the next morning holding 3 small paper bags in one hand and a crumpled receipt in the other. The bags weren't fancy, just sandwiches, fruit, and 2 chocolate chip cookies each, because Micah had loudly proclaimed the day before that oatmeal raisin was a betrayal. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. The sky was the soft gray blue of early light, and the street was still empty except for a bus hissing in the distance. He hadn't planned to come this early, but he couldn't sleep. Not when every part of his mind kept looping back to those small moments. Theo curling into him without a word, Jaden watching like he was trying to read a person the way others read books, Micah's endless chatter, and the way he clung to every detail. So instead of sitting in his hotel room, he walked down the block, bought breakfast, and waited. Margaret opened the door in a worn sweater and slippers her eyes soft and unsurprised. "You're back. I brought breakfast." "You're gonna spoil them," she warned gently, stepping aside to let him in. "I think that ship has sailed," Elijah murmured, handing her the bags. "They're still asleep," she said. "You can wait in the rec room." He settled onto the couch and looked around. It was quiet. A box of puzzles sat half-finished in the corner. Crayon drawings lined the wall, some scribbled, some carefully outlined. He wondered which ones were theirs. At 7:30, the shelter began to wake up. The creak of floorboards' voices, muffled by toothbrushes, the occasional cough. Then came the sound of feet running uneven, excited. The boys appeared in the doorway like a gust of wind. "Mr. Mercer," Micah said, then paused, frowning. "Wait, are we still calling you that? You can call me Elijah? Or whatever you want," he offered. Jaden stepped in, still sleepy-eyed. "You're back." Theo smiled, small but real. "I brought breakfast," Elijah said, lifting the bags. Micah let out a cheer. "Yes, please say no raisins. No raisins." Elijah grinned. I remembered. They sat together, eating on the floor like it was a picnic. Jaden tore open his sandwich and examined the bread like a food critic. Micah devoured his instantly. Theo held his, quietly nibbling the edges. Afterward, they walked to school together for the first time. It wasn't far, just 6 blocks, but it felt like an entire life's worth of space. The boys talked the whole way. Jaden recited basketball stats. Micah pointed out squirrels like they were secret agents. Theo held Elijah's pinky finger the last 2 blocks and didn't let go until the school gate. At the door, a teacher waved. "You must be Mr. Mercer." Elijah nodded. "Yes, kind of. We've heard about you." "Oh, in a good way," she smiled. "Mostly." Jaden turned around before walking in. "Are you picking us up later? I'll try," Elijah said. "I might have a meeting." Jaden just looked at him. "Try, or actually I'll be there," Elijah corrected himself. "Promise." That seemed to be enough. He watched them disappear through the school doors. For a moment, he stood still, heart lodged somewhere between his throat and ribs. Then he turned and walked straight to a courthouse. The process of gaining custody wasn't simple. He had no claim, no paperwork. His name wasn't on their birth certificates. Maya had left no will, no legal instructions. But Elijah wasn't interested in shortcuts. He filled out every form, spoke to the clerks with patience he didn't know he had, and scheduled a meeting with Child Services. When asked why he wanted to pursue guardianship, he said, "Because they're my sons." No one argued, not yet, but he could feel the skepticism, the raised eyebrows, the mental math being done behind polite smiles. Billionaire tech CEO suddenly reappears for 3 kids. He knew what they saw. Headlines, scandal. But that didn't matter to him anymore. He walked out of the courthouse with a copy of the temporary petition in hand and one thought circling in his mind: be early. By 2:30, he was outside the school gates, not just on time early. Other parents trickled in, most on their phones or chatting in small groups. Elijah stood apart, trying not to feel awkward in his tailored coat and polished shoes. When the bell rang, the crowd stirred. And then he saw them. Jaden came out, first eyes scanning, then Micah bounding like a puppy. Theo walked behind, quiet but watchful. They spotted him at the same moment. "You came," Jaden said. Not a question, a statement. "I did." Micah grinned. "Can we get hot chocolate?" Elijah looked at them, three little lives, orbiting each other like a perfect chaotic solar system. Hot chocolate sounds perfect. They walked together down the street, laughing, arguing about marshmallow ratios, Theo holding Elijah's hand again. At the cafe, they took up a corner booth and made a mess. Marshmallow foam on the table, crumbs in their sleeves, and for the first time in years, Elijah didn't care about messes. He leaned back, coffee untouched, and just watched them. Watched Jaden argue about superheroes like it was policy debate. Watched Micah mix his drink with 2 straws and a spoon. Watched Theo rest his chin on the table, humming quietly. He didn't speak, didn't take out his phone. He just sat in it. This life, this strange, beautiful, imperfect life he'd almost missed. And as the light from the cafe window washed over their faces, Elijah knew no meeting, no contract, no IPO had ever felt like this. This was the thing Maya had tried to protect. This was what she meant when she said not to walk away, and he wasn't going to. Not now, not ever again. It had been 2 weeks since Elijah began showing up, not just physically, but really showing up. Morning drop-offs, afternoons at the shelter, weekend chess games with Jaden, science experiments with Micah, and long, quiet drawing sessions with Theo. For a man whose life had once been dictated by 3 calendars and 2 executive assistants, Elijah was starting to learn how to slow down. He still didn't sleep well, but now it wasn't from stress. It was from a strange restlessness, like his body was adjusting to a new rhythm that didn't run on alarms and investor calls. This new rhythm ran on laughter, spilled juice, and questions like, why is the sky blue and gray, or do cats believe in ghosts? Elijah was learning. And then came the day he failed. It started simple. It always does. The boys had been excited all morning. He'd promised to pick them up from school, no assistants, no drivers, just him. Jaden even asked if they could stop for ice cream afterward, and Elijah, smiling, had said yes without thinking twice. He had set a dozen reminders, cleared his afternoon calendar, wrote it on a sticky note. But at 1:45 p.m., his phone buzzed. Urgent. You need to come in. The Singapore contract has issues. Legal is in a panic. He stared at the message, thought about ignoring it, but then his old habits, the reflexes of a man who had built everything from the ground up, took over. I'll be quick, he said out loud to no one. 20 minutes. It was not 20 minutes. By the time Elijah got out of the meeting, it was past 4:30. His phone had 8 missed calls from Margaret, 2 voicemails, 1 text that simply said, the boys waited. A volunteer picked them up. Call me. His stomach dropped. He didn't go back to the office. He didn't even respond to his assistant's summary of the meeting. He just drove. Fast. By the time he arrived at the shelter, the lobby was quiet. Margaret looked up from the desk, her expression unreadable. I'm so sorry, Elijah began. They were fine, she said gently. Micah waited with the teacher. Theo stayed close. But Jaden. Elijah braced himself. He got angry, said you weren't coming, that he knew it. Where is he now? Elijah asked. Micah and Theo are upstairs. Jaden. He and Micah left before the volunteer got there. They didn't tell anyone. What, his voice cracked. They just left. They went somewhere familiar. We think we know where. They've done it before. Margaret grabbed her coat and her keys. Come on. They drove through the city in silence. Elijah's fingers tapped the steering wheel non-stop. He's not mad because of today, Margaret said quietly. He's mad because life has taught him to expect disappointments from grown-ups. This one just confirmed it. Elijah closed his eyes briefly, shame curling hot in his chest. 10 minutes later, they pulled up to an old brick building with cracked windows and graffiti near the stairwell, the apartment where Maya had once lived, condemned now, but still standing. They've been back here before, Margaret explained. Memory is powerful at that age, especially when you're scared. Elijah climbed out of the car and jogged toward the stairwell. Margaret stayed behind. He called their names. No answer. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, heart pounding. On the 3rd floor, he found them. Through a broken door frame in the empty shell of a former home were 3 small figures. Jaden sat with his back to the wall, arms crossed tightly. Micah sat beside him, hugging a backpack. Theo was curled under a threadbare blanket. They looked up. Micah blinked, startled. Theo didn't move, but Jaden stared straight at him. "Told you," he said to no one in particular. "We shouldn't have trusted him." Elijah didn't argue. He stepped inside, slowly knelt on the dusty floor in his slacks and sat. "I messed up," he said softly. "I made the wrong choice today." None of them spoke. I could have sent someone to handle the meeting, or asked for more time, but I didn't, and that's on me. Theo shifted eyes, flicking toward him. Micah glanced between his brothers, uncertain. Jaden stared at the broken ceiling. "You said you'd be there." "I did," Elijah nodded. "And I wasn't. I'm sorry." For a while, no one said anything. Micah eventually leaned into Elijah's arm. He didn't speak, just rested there. Theo sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. But Jaden stayed still. "I don't need you to be perfect," he said finally. "But I need you to be there, even when it's not easy." Elijah's voice cracked. "I want to be, no matter what it costs." Jaden didn't respond, but he didn't tell him to leave either. That night, Elijah took them home, not to the shelter, to his own apartment. He made grilled cheese, burnt the edges. The boys didn't complain. They sat on the floor eating in silence, watching a cartoon they only half paid attention to, wrapped in blankets, still not quite forgiving, but no longer pulling away. When they finally fell asleep, curled into each other like the only safe thing they'd ever known, Elijah stood in the hallway. He didn't cry. He just stared at them and made a vow. Tomorrow he'd tell the board. Tomorrow everything would change. The boardroom was silent, not the tense kind of silence that usually came before a merger deal or during market uncertainty. This was different, more personal, disbelieving. Elijah stood at the head of the long walnut table, his hands resting flat on the polished surface, eyes moving across the familiar faces that had sat there with him for the past 10 years. "I'm not resigning," he said clearly. "I'm stepping back." A beat. Then voices erupted like a fire alarm. "You're what, Elijah? We're in the middle of expansion talks with Jakarta. You can't just walk away right now. This company is your name." Elijah raised a hand, not angry, just steady. "And I'm not walking away. I'll still be CEO, but I won't be here every day, not in the same way. I'll attend major meetings, keep oversight, but I'm done living in this building." One of the senior partners leaned forward. "And this is about those boys." "Yes," Elijah replied without hesitation. "It is." The room grew quiet again. He looked at the men and women who had seen him go without sleep for days, who had watched him pull off last-minute deals like magic tricks, who respected him for being unshakable. But Elijah didn't want to be unshakable anymore. He wanted to be reachable. "I found out I have 3 sons," he said. "Triplets, 6 years old. Their mother was someone I once loved deeply. She passed away." He paused. No one spoke. "They've been getting by without me, but I'm not going to let that continue. I missed the first 6 years of their lives. I'm not missing more." The room remained quiet, stunned, but no one interrupted. "I've already started the guardianship process. It'll take time. Maya left no will. I have no legal ties to them yet, but I'm going to be there in every way that counts." One board member finally broke the silence. "You're willing to jeopardize your legacy for this?" Elijah smiled almost sadly. "You don't get it. They are my legacy." Later, when the meeting ended and the room emptied out, Elijah stood alone in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city. The same skyline that once made him feel powerful now looked distant. He texted Margaret starting guardianship paperwork. "I'll be picking them up today," she replied within seconds. "They'll be happy. Jaden's been carrying your business card in his backpack." That made his breath catch. He didn't know what to do with that kind of detail, so small but so big. He arrived at school 10 minutes early. This time, no phone calls, no meetings squeezed in before pickup. He just leaned on the fence and waited, hands in his coat pockets, heart steady. When the bell rang, the boys came out together. Jaden spotted him first. He didn't smile, but his pace quickened. "You're early," he said. "I told you I would be," Elijah replied. Micah ran ahead, backpack half open, and gave a loud yes, like it was Christmas. Theo walked quietly, but once he reached Elijah, he held out a folded paper. "What's this? It's us," Theo said. Elijah opened it. It was a crayon drawing 4 stick figures under a crooked sun, 3 small, 1 tall, all smiling. "I love it," he said, crouching down. "Is this me?" "No," Theo said seriously. "That's Jaden. You're the one with the long legs and the coffee." Elijah laughed out loud, and something inside him melted completely. That night after dinner, he let them help fill out the guardianship paperwork. Not the legal parts, but things like their favorite foods, bedtime routines, fears. Under strengths, Jaden wrote, he doesn't freak out when Micah spills things. Under weaknesses, Micah wrote, he can't cook. Under goals, Theo simply wrote, stay. Elijah swallowed hard and circled it. That's mine too. The caseworker, Ms. Lacey, came by 2 days later. She was soft-spoken, with an efficient air and a clipboard that never left her side. She met each boy asking gentle questions, how long they'd known Elijah, what they thought about living with him, what they missed about their mom. Elijah sat through it all nervous, in a way he hadn't been since pitching his first startup. Afterward, Ms. Lacey asked to speak with him alone. They stepped into the kitchen. You're trying, she said. That's clear. I want this to work, Elijah said. Not just legally. I want to be someone they can count on. She studied him for a moment. What makes you think you're ready for that? Elijah didn't answer with stats or schedules or hired help. He said, because I've rearranged my whole life around making sure I don't miss a single pickup again. She nodded. That's a good start. He walked her out, then went back inside to find the boys playing a chaotic game of sock dodgeball in the hallway. Careful, he warned. Micah pegged him in the chest with a rolled-up sock. You're on my team now. I didn't agree to this. Elijah laughed. You don't get to pick, Jaden shouted from behind a pillow fort. Theo peeked out from inside the laundry basket. He can be the shield. And Elijah, for the first time in decades, dropped to the floor and let himself be pulled into the chaos. Later that night, after they'd fallen asleep and the apartment was quiet, Elijah stood by their bedroom door. He watched the steady rise and fall of their breathing, the dim glow of the nightlight casting soft shadows. He thought about how much he still didn't know, how often he'd probably mess up, but he also knew this. He was here, and he wasn't going anywhere. Elijah was in the kitchen burning toast again. He squinted at the toaster as if staring it down would somehow fix the fact that one side was pitch black, while the other looked barely warmed. He sighed, dropped the toast on a plate, and added a lopsided pile of scrambled eggs that had started as fluffy dreams, but ended up oddly rubbery. Then he filled 3 cups with orange juice, equal levels, no pulp, as per Theo's very specific request. When he set the plates down at the table, the boys were already sliding into their usual spots, still in their mismatched pajamas. Micah wore his dinosaur onesie with a rip under the arm. Jaden had on a t-shirt that said, Future President, in faded red letters. Theo was curled into the oversized hoodie. Elijah had let him borrow one that went all the way past his knees. Okay, Elijah said, clapping his hands. This is breakfast, not perfection. Just chew carefully. Micah bit into the toast, frowned dramatically, and said, It's not that bad. Yeah, Elijah raised an eyebrow. Just crunchy in places. Toast shouldn't crunch. Theo didn't say a word, but gave Elijah a thumbs up and kept eating. Jaden, as usual, inspected his plate like a restaurant critic. The eggs are chewy. I'm working on it, Elijah said. Jaden gave him a look. You should probably stop working and start Googling. That made Elijah laugh. Noted. After breakfast, he drove them to school. He'd come to love that stretch of time when the sun poured through the windshield and the boys bickered about music or swapped knock-knock jokes they barely understood. Elijah even started keeping a notebook in the glove compartment, writing down the little things they said that made him pause. Theo once whispered from the back seat, Do clouds get tired? Elijah had written it down and circled it. These were the questions that mattered. At school, drop-off, Jaden gave him the usual, see you later, with a nod, which had become their unofficial handshake. Micah did a cartwheel he wasn't supposed to do on school grounds, and Theo lingered for a second longer than usual, holding Elijah's hand before finally letting go. Then, Elijah had a free hour. No board meetings, no calls, just time. He went straight to the adoption office. The paperwork was already halfway done. Legal guardianship had been granted temporarily, but Elijah wanted something permanent, something official. Something that said, "These are my boys," not just emotionally, but legally, publicly, forever. The caseworker reviewed the updates he'd added: new emergency contacts, school release forms, health insurance coverage. He had it all lined up. She looked up at him. "You're doing this fast." "I'm doing this right," he replied. Later that day, he sat through Theo's first music class recital. It was only 15 minutes long. The kids banged on tambourines and played xylophones with absolutely no rhythm, but Theo stood front and center holding a tiny drum and beating it with the kind of focus that made Elijah's heart swell. When Theo saw him in the crowd afterward, he didn't smile. He ran straight into Elijah's arms and pressed his face into his chest. "You came." "Of course I did," Elijah said, holding him tighter. That weekend they painted birdhouses on the porch. Elijah had bought a cheap set from a craft store, not realizing how serious the boys would take it. Jaden built a 2-story design and insisted on adding a flagpole. Micah painted his to look like a spaceship. Theo used only black and white, carefully drawing stars on the roof. Mom used to paint stuff, Theo said quietly, not looking up. "I know," Elijah said. "She was good at it. She said, 'Paint never lies. It shows what's inside you.'" Elijah nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Then yours is beautiful." That night, after the boys were asleep, Elijah stood in the hallway looking at the birdhouses lined up on the windowsill. 3 little houses, 3 little worlds. He wasn't thinking in stock values anymore. He wasn't wondering what the next tech wave would be. He was wondering what kind of toothbrush Micah needed now that he was losing teeth. He was figuring out how to explain what PTA meant. He was Googling how to make pancakes without turning them into chewy bricks. And it felt good. One night after dinner, Jaden asked the question Elijah knew would come eventually. "Why didn't you come looking for us?" They were sitting on the couch, the TV playing quietly in the background. Micah was dozing with his head on Elijah's knee. Theo was curled up like a cat in the corner with a blanket over his head. Elijah didn't try to soften the answer. "I didn't know you existed," he said. "If I had, everything would have changed." Jaden looked down. "She talked about you sometimes. Like, you were a story. I should have been more than that." "You are now," Jaden said, almost under his breath. That night, after they went to sleep, Elijah pulled out the journal he'd started. He wrote Jaden, "Let me braid his hair today." Micah ate a sandwich upside down to see if it tasted different. Theo asked me if the stars remember people. He paused, pen in hand, then wrote, "I think they do." The next morning, Elijah woke before the alarm made pancakes that were only slightly too thick and packed school lunches with handwritten notes that said, "You're amazing, and don't forget to smile." And when the boys ran out the door laughing and shoving each other, Elijah followed close behind. He wasn't perfect, but he was there. And for the first time, Dad didn't feel like a title he was trying on. It felt like home. It was raining the morning they went to court. Not the angry kind of rain, just soft, steady drizzle that made everything smell like wet earth and old leaves. The boys pressed their noses to the car window as Elijah pulled into the courthouse parking lot, each of them wearing small, ill-fitting suits that they had picked out themselves. Micah's jacket was too big, the sleeves hanging past his wrists. Jaden had insisted on wearing a red clip-on tie, even though it clashed terribly with his shirt. Theo had brought a stuffed rabbit in a backpack just in case the judge was scary. Elijah sat behind the wheel hands, still gripping it even after the engine shut off. "You okay?" Jaden asked from the back seat. Elijah turned, gave a soft smile. "Yeah, just kind of a big day." Micah leaned forward between the seats. "You already live with us. This is just paperwork." "It's more than that," Elijah said. "It makes it real, for all of us." Theo reached over and squeezed his hand. "It's already real." Inside the courthouse, everything felt too clean, too formal. The walls were cream-colored and silent. The floors echoed with every step, but the boys didn't seem fazed. They held onto Elijah's hands, one on each side, and looked around with wide, curious eyes. Margaret was waiting outside the courtroom, dressed in her Sunday best. She smiled when she saw them. "They look sharp," she whispered. "I tried," Elijah said. Jaden picked the ties. Margaret smiled at the boys. then looked back at Elijah with something deeper in her eyes, something close to pride. "You ready for this?" she asked. He nodded, more than anything. The courtroom was small, a few rows of benches, a desk where the judge sat flanked by the flags of the state. The court clerk gave them a soft smile as they approached. Elijah sat beside the boys at the front, heart thudding in his chest like it was trying to break free. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt nervous in a room. But then again, he had never tried to become a father by law before. The judge entered a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a kind voice. She reviewed the documents, asked a few quiet questions, then looked over her glasses at Elijah. "Mr. Mercer, do you understand what this means?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you accept these 3 boys as your legal sons, not just in name, but in duty and in love?" Elijah looked at each of them. Jaden sitting upright and serious, Micah fidgeting with his tie, Theo holding the stuffed rabbit in his lap like it was sacred. "I already do," Elijah said. His voice caught at the edges. "Every day." The judge nodded. "Then I'm pleased to grant the adoption petition. Jaden, Micah, and Theo Daniels will now be legally recognized as the sons of Elijah Mercer." Micah whispered, "So, do we get new last names or superhero capes?" The room chuckled. The judge leaned forward. "That's between you and your dad." And just like that, it was done. No fireworks, no music. Just a quiet kind of completion that sank into Elijah's bones and stayed there. They walked out of the courthouse under the same soft rain. Elijah held the umbrella low over the boys, who laughed and jumped through puddles in their shiny shoes. "We should get cake," Micah announced, "or tacos," Jaden added. "Theo just said, I want to go home." Elijah looked at them, heart swelling in his chest. "Let's do all 3. They spent the afternoon eating street tacos, then walked into a bakery, still dressed like they'd come from a wedding. The lady behind the counter gave them extra frosting on their slices when Theo told her, "We're a new family today." Back home, the boys piled into the living room like they owned it, which they did now. Their toys were already scattered across the floor, crayons left open, a science kit half assembled. The birdhouses they had painted still sat on the windowsill, catching drops of rain on the glass behind them. Elijah stood at the doorway and watched it all. The mess, the movement, the noise, and he'd never felt more at peace. Later that night, when the dishes were done and teeth brushed, they gathered on the couch under one big blanket. Elijah held the adoption papers in his lap, not to read them, but just to feel the weight of them, the realness of it. "Do we call you Dad now?" Micah asked, eyes peeking out from the blanket. "If you want to," Elijah said. Theo nodded sleepily. "I already do. In my head." Jaden leaned his head against Elijah's shoulder. "You earned it." That simple sentence undid him. He didn't cry, not this time. But his throat closed up, and he pulled them closer without a word. They stayed like that for a long time, breathing together, whole. The next morning, Elijah got up early and made pancakes that were almost perfect. He packed lunches with little post-it notes. "You are brave. You are smart. You are loved." He dropped them off at school, stood at the gate a little longer than usual, and waved until they disappeared. Then he called his lawyer to begin the next step, changing the names on their birth certificates. He wasn't erasing who they were. He was adding a new chapter. When the updated papers arrived a week later, he let each of them open their envelope. Jaden read his slowly, then looked up and said, "That looks right." Micah tried to forge Elijah's signature underneath his own name. Theo stared at his paper, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his pillowcase. That weekend, they went to the park and planted a cherry blossom tree in Maya's honor. Elijah brought a photo of her, one of the only ones he had, and placed it at the base of the tree, letting the boys write messages on little slips of paper and bury them beneath the roots. "She'd be proud," Margaret whispered, watching them from the path. "She'd be surprised," Elijah said. "She knew you'd come," Margaret replied. "She just didn't know when." As the wind moved through the branches, Elijah stood there with one hand on Jaden's shoulder, the other on Micah's back, Theo holding his hand tightly. They didn't need ceremony or speeches. They had something better now, each other. And that was all that mattered. Spring came slowly that year. The mornings were still cool, but sunlight now poured in through the kitchen windows in gold, lighting up the drawings taped to the fridge and the muddy sneakers by the back door. The tree they had planted for Maya was starting to bloom soft pink blossoms, stretching toward the sky like small hands, reaching for something unseen. Elijah stood on the porch, a cup of coffee in one hand, watching the boys run wild in the backyard. Jaden was building something elaborate out of sticks and string, a trap for squirrels, he claimed. Micah was covered in mud, gleefully digging for worms. Theo had his sketchbook quietly perched on the steps, drawing the tree with careful, tiny strokes. This was their life now, and it was real. Not perfect, not curated, but real in a way that money couldn't touch. Elijah had stopped measuring time in quarterly reports. Now he measured it in missing teeth soccer practices and how many weeks it had been since Theo had a nightmare. He marked days by what they laughed at during dinner or how many pancakes he could flip before someone yelled burnt. He had found something in fatherhood that boardrooms had never given him: purpose without performance. Every Friday night was game night now. Sometimes it ended in spilled popcorn and a tantrum over who cheated. Sometimes it ended in Elijah falling asleep on the couch mid-game, a board piece stuck to his cheek, and one of the boys quietly pulling a blanket over him. Weekends became sacred. Saturday mornings were for pancakes and cartoons, afternoons for the park or the bookstore or the hardware store if Jaden had a new project idea. Sundays were slower, usually with a long walk through the neighborhood, Theo's hand in his, and Micah talking so much, Elijah wondered if he ever breathed between sentences. One afternoon, Jaden came home from school, unusually quiet. Elijah noticed right away. "Everything okay?" Jaden shrugged, dropped his backpack, and sat at the kitchen table, his arms folded. "I had to bring in something for our Who Inspires You project," he said. "I told my teacher I didn't have anyone." Elijah's heart clenched. "You didn't want to talk about your mom, I did," Jaden said, "but I didn't want to cry in front of everyone." Elijah nodded. "That's fair," Jaden fiddled with a spoon. "She was always my answer. But now, I think I have a second one." Elijah leaned in. "Yeah," Jaden didn't look up. "It's you." That moment was quiet. No music swelled. No one cried. Just a boy speaking something true, and a man realizing what it meant to be chosen, intentionally, freely. "I'm proud of you," Elijah said softly. "Always." Jaden nodded. "I know." That night, Elijah added it to the notebook he kept beside his bed, the one filled with all the things they said or did that he never wanted to forget. Sometimes late at night, he would flip through it and feel the ache of all the time he had missed. But that ache had softened into something else. Not guilt anymore. Gratitude. For second chances. For letters left behind. For laughter he had once thought he'd never hear. Micah's science project won second place at the school fair. Theo had a small painting accepted into a citywide student art show. Jaden made the soccer team and immediately declared himself co-captain, despite there being no vote. Elijah showed up to every event. Early. With snacks. With his phone turned off and his heart wide open. And little by little, they stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. They stopped flinching when he was late by a minute. They stopped looking at him like maybe he would disappear. One evening, as the sky turned lavender outside, Theo climbed onto the couch beside Elijah, curled into his side, and whispered, "Can I ask something?" Always, Elijah said. "If you didn't find us, what would you be doing right now?" Elijah thought about it. "I'd probably be in some tall office looking out a big window talking about money." Theo wrinkled his nose. "That sounds boring." It was. "So this is better." Elijah pulled him closer. "So much better." Theo nodded like he understood everything in the world. Then he said, "I'm glad we found you." "Me too," Elijah whispered. They sat like that until the others joined them, piling on the couch in a tangle of elbows and blankets and stuffed animals. No one fit perfectly, but no one minded. They watched a movie half asleep before it ended. Elijah stayed up, brushing hair back from foreheads, adjusting the blanket. He looked down at the faces he would have given anything to have known from the beginning, and now couldn't imagine living without. Later, when they were tucked into bed and the house had gone still, Elijah stepped out onto the porch again. The tree Maya loved bloomed quietly in the dark. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "I kept my promise." He didn't expect an answer, but he felt something in his chest, like peace, or maybe grace. Then he pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app, where he still kept that first line he wrote after they moved in. 3 boys, who never have to wonder if they're loved. He added a second line underneath, and one father who never wants to live another day without them. Then he turned off the phone, stepped inside, and closed the door behind him. And for the first time in his life, Elijah Mercer wasn't building a legacy, he was living one. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on family second chances or what really matters, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear what part of Elijah's journey touched you most. Want more heartfelt stories like this one? Check out the next video linked right here. It might just change the way you see the world. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and keep believing in redemption.